Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Jefferson's Salute to the Presidents. I'm Thomas Watson, and this 8.5-inch friend of mine is my travel companion and star of the show, Thomas Jefferson. On this episode, the two of us pay tribute to the life of our 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes. TJ and I have visited Hayes' home in Fremont, Ohio many times because it's only 2 hours and 15 minutes from our house and is the closest major presidential site from where we live. So if you're ready, please sit back, maybe grab a stack of green corn fritters, a Hayes favorite, and enjoy the show. Rutherford Burchard Hayes was born on this site on October 4th, 1822 in Delaware, Ohio. The original Hayes birthplace home was razed in 1929. Today, this BP gas station sits on the site once occupied by the home where Hayes was born. Birthplace of Rutherford B. Hayes. I'm standing on the monument that marks the property where Hayes's birthplace once stood. The future president's father, Rutherford Ezekiel Hayes, Jr., was a storekeeper but died 10 weeks before his son was born. Hayes's mother, Sophia, never remarried. About a year after Rutherford's birth, Sophia packed up the kids and moved about a block down the street to a home now occupied by the William Street United Methodist Church. Sophia's younger brother, Sardis Burchard, moved into the home and became a father figure to young Rutherford. Hayes lived here from the age of 1 to 14. In 1846, Sophia sold the property to the trustees of the Methodist Church, where they turned the place into a parsonage. Hayes graduated from Harvard Law School in 1845 and was admitted to the Ohio bar shortly after. Rutherford opened his own law office in Fremont, but in 1850 he moved to Cincinnati where he joined a more established law firm. This was Rutherford B. Hayes' law desk he used when he practiced law in Cincinnati in the 1850s. I wanted to stand on the desk, but my photographer knew an alarm would sound if he placed me on the historic artifact. Hayes was 30 when he married 21-year-old Lucy Webb on December 30th, 1852 at the bride's mother's home in Cincinnati. The dress behind me was worn by Lucy Webb when she married Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes served in the military throughout the entire Civil War, taking part in at least 50 battles and was wounded several times. While still serving as an active officer during the Civil War, Rutherford was elected to the United States House of Representatives. Hayes refused to leave the war, stating, "An officer fit for duty who at this crisis would abandon his post to electioneer for a seat in Congress ought to be scalped." The new congressman recited the oath of office in December 1865 and represented Ohio in the House until July 20th, 1867. Hayes won the Ohio gubernatorial election in 1867 and served 2 terms as the state's 29th governor beginning on January 12, 1868. 4 years after leaving office the first time, Hayes became the 32nd governor of Ohio on January 10, 1876. Hayes remained in office until March 2, 1877, just 2 days before he recited the oath of office as President of the United States. The 1876 presidential election was one of the closest and most controversial in American history. On November 11th, 3 days after Election Day, Democrat Samuel J. Tilden had won 184 electoral votes, one short of the needed majority, with 3 states still up in the air. With nothing resolved by January 1877, President Grant agreed to a bipartisan electoral commission, who were designated to determine the fate of the disputed 20 electoral votes. In February, the commission decided the votes would go in favor of Hayes, which immediately caused the Democrats to begin a filibuster to keep Congress from accepting the decision. Finally, on March 2, 1877, the Senate announced Rutherford B. Hayes had been elected as our 19th president by an electoral vote of 185 to 184. Since Inauguration Day was on a Sunday in 1877, the ceremony was scheduled for Monday, March 5th. But fearing an insurrection by the Tilden supporters, outgoing President Ulysses S. Grant had another idea. Grant insisted Rutherford B. Hayes be inaugurated inside the Executive Mansion on Saturday, March 3, 1877, 2 days before a public swearing-in ceremony at the Capitol. In the evening of March 3, 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes recited the presidential oath of office in the Red Room of the Executive Mansion. Hayes became the first president to be inaugurated inside the House of the President. The Democrats, however, never considered his election legitimate and called him Rutherfraud for the next 4 years. On Monday, March 5, 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes stood on the east portico of the United States Capitol where he recited the oath of office during the public inauguration ceremony. During his inaugural address, Hayes became the first president to not invoke God or a supreme being in his speech. The public inauguration of Rutherford B. Hayes, March 5, 1877. When President Hayes recited the presidential oath of office on March 5, 1877, his hand rested on Psalm 118, verse 11 of this King James Bible. Hayes also sat in the chair behind me during the inauguration ceremony at the Capitol. The suit coat and top hat were worn by President Hayes during his inauguration. Once he took up residence in the Executive Mansion, President Hayes immediately ended Reconstruction of the South, which was essentially dead anyway. He also faced issues with the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, as well as two issues regarding the nation's currency. Perhaps his biggest claim to fame as president came when he had alcohol banned from all White House functions, which aligned with his wife's temperance leanings. First Lady Lucy Hayes. While this dress behind me was not Lucy Hayes's inaugural gown, the First Lady did wear it during White House receptions. The 19th president paid $1,150 for his new carriage he purchased on March 22, 1877. President Hayes used this elegant carriage for daily travel, often inviting Civil War friends and fellow politicians along for a ride. Among his passengers were Presidents Grant, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, and McKinley. Rutherford and Lucy Hayes ordered this mahogany sideboard in 1880 for use in their private dining room in the White House. In 1880, President Hayes kept his pledge and did not seek re-election. During the Republican National Convention, he did not support Grant's attempt at a third term. As a matter of fact, Hayes believed the office of president should be only a single 6-year term. After he and his wife Lucy attended the inauguration of James A. Garfield, the Hayeses returned to Fremont, where they lived in retirement at their estate known as Spiegel Grove. No new states were admitted during Hayes' administration, and that trend continued until Benjamin Harrison was in office. The mansion behind me is called Spiegel Grove and was built for Sardis Burchard in 1860. Burchard, a lifelong bachelor, built the large home with the intent his nephew Rutherford, along with his family, reside there during his retirement. In 1873, a year or so before Burchard's death, Rutherford B. Hayes inherited Spiegel Grove and its lavish grounds. I'm standing in front of the original 1860 section of the house, which at that time did not feature this huge porch. In 1880, after leaving the White House, Hayes expanded the home to accommodate his large, ever-growing family. That expansion not only included the entire section to my left, but Hayes also added the huge wraparound porch I'm standing on. A final expansion occurred in 1889 when 6 more rooms were added to the home. That was the same year Lucy Hayes passed away. I'm standing on the large veranda at Spiegel Grove where Lucy and President Hayes once posed for a photograph. Rutherford and Lucy Hayes at Spiegel Grove. Shortly before Lucy's death, the Hayeses posed near this section of the porch with Ohio Secretary of State William Henry Smith. Lucy and Rutherford with William Henry Smith. One of my favorite spots to pose at Spiegel Grove is on the south steps of the large porch, for it was here in the mid-1880s where the president sat for a family photo. The president with his family. Spiegel Grove may not be as historically famous as Mount Vernon, Heathfield, Monticello, or Sagamore Hill, but it's one of my favorite presidential homes I've ever had the honor to visit. Without knocking, because I might get choked, let's go through the door behind me and visit the world of Rutherford and Lucy Hayes. This is the entrance hall inside Spiegel Grove. The original 1860 section of the home is on the right side of this image, while the 1880 edition was behind me on the left side. The first room I visited was known as the Red Parlor, named after the Red Room of the White House where Rutherford B. Hayes was inaugurated on March 3, 1877. A portrait of the Hayes' only daughter, Fanny, was displayed above the fireplace. I'm standing on Rutherford and Lucy's bed in their master bedroom. This dressing table I'm standing on was Lucy's and was where she readied herself to take on each day. The sewing machine behind me was owned and used by Lucy Hayes. When Rutherford was at winter camp during the Civil War, Lucy brought the sewing machine to the camp to mend the soldiers' uniforms. One sunny June day in 1889, Lucy Hayes sat in this chair, her favorite, as she gazed out of the window to my left to watch her grandchildren play in the yard. Suddenly, the former First Lady slumped over, still seated here. She had suffered a massive stroke. Family members carried Lucy to the bed behind me and summoned doctors to the home. A few days later, on June 25th, 1889, Lucy Hayes died in this bed at the age of 57. The grief-stricken president said, "The soul has left Spiegel Grove." This was the bathroom, located next to the master bedroom. The wooden slider over the bathtub was used when Rutherford bathed and wrote in his diary at the same time. I love to stand on presidential toilets, and in this image, I'm posing on the wooden throne where President Hayes did his daily business. This elkhorn chair was crafted by Seth Kinman, a California hunter and trapper. The chair was presented to Governor Hayes on September 18th, 1876. Governor Hayes was Seth Kinman, September 19th, 1876. The large parlor, which was part of the 1880 renovation at Spiegel Grove, was the largest room in the mansion. The painting on the wall behind me was called Babes Ascending. The two boys in the portrait represented George and Joe Hayes, each of whom died before the age of 2 during the Civil War. President Hayes took possession of the life-size portrait behind me on May 7th, 1878, and he made sure the ceiling in this room could accommodate the framed painting. The total cost for this portrait was $2,400, which included the $900 frame. In this image taken inside the large parlor, I saw the large 25th anniversary portrait of Lucy Hayes, which was painted in the White House. The other portrait on the right side of this image was of Rutherford's sister, Fanny, whose name was used for the Hayes' only daughter. I'm standing in front of the fireplace in the large parlor, which was the spot where Fanny Hayes stood on September 1st, 1897, when she married Ensign Harry Eaton Smith. The ceremony took place one day before Fanny's 30th birthday, with President William McKinley in attendance. As I stood on the cabinet, I was amazed by the number of books in Hayes's library. The books around me were not originally owned by the president, but were identical volumes to the ones owned by Hayes. Rutherford's original books are preserved in the Presidential Library, located on the grounds of Spiegel Grove. Rutherford B. Hayes admired Abraham Lincoln and had numerous paintings, portraits, and statues located throughout Spiegel Grove. It was cool to stand face to face with old Abe. This podium I'm standing on was once used by President Hayes. Spiegel Grove staff photographer Gil Gonzalez captured this image of my photographer as he captured an image of me in the library on March 16th, 2019. The dining room was added to the home during the final expansion in 1889, but sadly Lucy had died before the room was finished. Even though President Hayes was the head of the household, he refused to sit at the head of the table while dining. The president seated at the dining room table at Spiegel Grove. Fanny Hayes's wedding reception was held in the dining room at Spiegel Grove. President McKinley dined in this room during the reception. This original sideboard in the dining room featured some of Hayes's original White House china. From the first floor, I had a chance to look up to the skylight above, which served two purposes in the mansion. The windows were opened in the summer months to allow heat to escape, and Lucy Hayes kept some of her plants near the windows, which also gave her a 360-degree view of the grounds. Let's go up the original staircase and visit a couple of the second floor bedrooms. This second floor bedroom, located in the original part of the house, was the bedroom used by Sardis Burchard during the 14 years he lived in the home. I wanted to pose near the portrait of Uncle Sardis because he played such an important role in the life of Rutherford B. Hayes. I don't usually focus on the bedroom of presidential children, but I insisted on posing in Fannie Hayes's bedroom because she was Rutherford and Lucy's only daughter. When Lucy Hayes died in 1889, Fannie was her father's constant companion for the remainder of his life. The porcelain doll to my right was once owned by Fannie Hayes, while the portrait above me featured the president and his only daughter. It's been said that Rutherford disliked the way he looked in this portrait. Less than 4 years after his wife's death, President Hayes laid on this bed and said to his son Webb, "I know that I am going where Lucy is." Those were our 19th president's last words. At 11 p.m. on January 17, 1893, Rutherford B. Hayes died in the arms of his son on this bed after complications suffered from a heart attack. Hayes was 70 years old. It's hard to describe the feeling I had when I stood on the original bed where both Rutherford and Lucy Hayes had died. Following the president's death, a brief funeral was held in the large parlor at Spiegel Grove. The service was conducted by Reverend J. L. Alberton of the local Methodist Church. Rutherford B. Hayes was originally buried alongside his wife Lucy in Oakwood Cemetery, which was located a short distance from Spiegel Grove in Fremont. On March 31st, 1915, the bodies of the president and his wife were moved from this site and reinterred at Spiegel Grove. Although the president's original grave behind me was empty, I was excited to stand on the headstone which marked the final resting place of Fannie Hayes. The disinterment of President Hayes, March 31st, 1915. On April 3rd, 1915, Webb Hayes had his parents reinterred on their favorite knoll at Spiegel Grove. I thought I was nuts when I stood on the monument which marked the graves of Rutherford and Lucy Hayes. This was the first presidential gravesite I had visited during my illustrious career of presidential travels. Following Webb's death on July 26, 1934, he was laid to rest directly behind the monument that marked his parents' grave. Before I left the burial site, I visited the gravesite of Old Whitey, the president's warhorse who had died at Spiegel Grove in 1879. On March 27th, 2025, I was excited to pose at the grave of our 19th president with my photographer's granddaughter, Reese Facelli. This was Reese's second visit to a presidential gravesite. Well, that's it for another show. Did you wash your fritters down with a cold glass of lemonade? Jefferson and I hope you enjoyed our tribute to Rutherford B. Hayes and his wife, Lemonade Lucy. Please do us a favor and subscribe to this channel and hit that like button below. If you want to read more about our travels around the country, visit our blog called Through the Eyes of Jefferson. You can find it at eyesofjefferson.com. Our next show will feature the incredible life story of one of our favorite presidents, James A. Garfield. I know I say this every time, but that is one episode you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. So long.